Good morning, Unity of Wichita. It's so good to be with you this morning. I am the Reverend Natalie Vorst, and today we're going to have a conversation about where there's a will, surrender is the way. I say it's a conversation because each and every one of us has that still small voice, that God within. And I'd like you to become present to it because today that voice has designed a message just for you. So let's get started. I want to start with a story about my Aunt Therese. She's the youngest of 9, and in an effort to be heard over the scuttle and keep up with the older kids, she would often employ something my grandmother called willfulness. Well, one day she wanted to do what the big kids were doing. You see, my grandparents owned a huge chicken farm, and every day they collected a lot of eggs. And every day, a lot of eggs meant a lot of chickens and a lot of chicken poop. So this chicken poop was collected at the end of the runs in these huge vats. And so it made for maybe not the most safe place for a kid to play, and also a little, smelly. Anyway, Therese was particularly feisty one day, and she convinced my grandmother to let her go and help collect the eggs. So my grandmother said, all right, if you're going to come along, you've got to keep your hand on the hem of my skirt. That way I'll know where you are all the time. Keep your hand on the hem of my skirt. So they went off to collect eggs. And this was a big job. There were a lot of eggs to collect. And so they went along their way, and finally, the last run, Therese looks up and she sees the door that goes outside. Oh, let's get outside. That sounds fun. So she lets go of my grandmother's hem, and my grandmother, without missing a beat, swoops in, catches her hand, and puts it back on the hem. So Therese does it again, and my grandmother catches her hand and puts it back on the hem. And this went back and forth like 6 or 8 times. She was very determined. But finally she gave in and she kept a hold of the hem. And as they went down the run further and further, they got closer and closer to the door outside. So finally, Therese gathers up her willfulness and lets go of the hem, quickly dodges my grandmother's hand, and takes a giant leap toward the door, landing directly in the vat of chicken poop. She was up to her pigtails. Oof. Turns out, when you're up to your pigtails and chicken poop, it's best not to make waves. Surrender is a better option. And so she did, and my grandmother quickly picked her up out of that and brought her to the yard and hosed her off with a garden hose. Whew, talk about needing a fresh start. So I understand that you guys are talking about a fresh start and how that connects to the power of will. I like that. I also start with this story about willfulness because I think it's important to distinguish the difference between the power of will and willfulness. Willfulness is something that I experience as an exercise of the egoic mind. It is something that keeps us in this space of ourselves pushing or forcing something forward. We think we have to do it on our own. But the power of will is a little different. The power of will is engaged by your higher self. So here's a good litmus test. If you are forcing, if you are fearful, if you are trying to make something happen, you're probably in willfulness. But if you are talking about the power of will, if you are engaged with your higher self, it sounds a lot more like this verse from Job, chapter 22, verse 28. It says, "You will decide on a matter, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on all your ways." Let me say that again. You will decide on a matter, and it will be established for you, and light will shine on all your ways. So, I want to start with a little bit from Linda Martella-Whitsett and explain this power of will. She does it great in her book, Divine Audacity. She says, spiritual will is our power of choice, commitment, and willingness. Choice, commitment, and willingness. Let's start with choice. Every fresh start begins with the opportunity to make a new choice. We get to choose from an infinite number of possibilities from an unlimited, abundant source. This can be wonderful to remember that we are in this wonderful universe that was designed for us, that it is unlimited. But sometimes that can be an overwhelming situation. Where do we start? Well, it is suggested that we start with our own desire. Now, I, for a long time, felt like desire was something that the voice of Natalie came up with. It was something that I wanted, I needed. And the more I delve into this power of will, the more I'm seeing clearly that our desires, we were designed to have desire. We were designed for that. And it's not necessarily that we are conjuring our desire, as much as it is our higher self creating these desires to call us forth to our next expansion of consciousness. I liked that. I liked the idea that my desires were calling me forth. The other way around, when I thought these were my desires and I had to accomplish them, I felt sometimes like I had to strong arm something or bend someone else's will to get mine. But the power of will isn't that. The power of will expands us all. So I loved the idea of these desires being my higher self's way of saying, this is the way to go. And from those desires, I get to make a choice. It sounds like the first part of that verse from Job. We decide on the matter. Now, often that is easier said than done. I understand that. In fact, it reminds me of this time when a good friend of mine was trying to buy a new condo, and he had two really good choices. So he went back and forth. He wrote his pros and cons. He was just finding everything he could about each place. And he couldn't decide. And he called me to kind of be a sounding board, see if I heard something maybe he didn't. And while he is talking, I distinctly hear Spirit say, you can't make a wrong choice. What? I'm pretty sure I've made wrong choices before. Say it, Natalie. Spirit said, say it, Natalie. So I said to my good friend, you can't make a wrong choice. And he stopped. And he said, that strikes a tone with me. It feels like all my hemming and hawing has been lifted. It feels like the pressure of having to make the right choice has been lifted. And in that moment, really, he was able to make his choice. He was able to decide on the matter. Well, the same applies to you. In a universe that has been created for us, in our favor, truthfully, you can't make the wrong choice. You come out and you tune into this desire and you trust yourself in this co-creation with God. And it will be decided together. That brings us to our second component, this component of commitment. Commitment is the sustaining power of will. It really references our third principle, which is that we are co-creators with God. Co-creators. I like that. It's about being in connection, not being in constant efforting, constant doing, being, forcing that issue. It is about really tuning in to co-create together and understand that it will come forth. Commitment is knowing that you know that you know. You know that God and this whole universe is conspiring for your greatest good. You know that you know that you know. And you make a commitment to that. Commitment is also engaging the fourth principle of unity, which is to pray. A commitment is taking that time to say an affirmative prayer, to affirm that it is already done for you. Affirming what already is. Sounds a lot like it will be established for you. It will be established for you. Knowing that our good goes out before us and that source is abundant. Commitment is leaning in and trusting the divine to deliver. Trusting that it is a true co-creation. Commitment is creating a practice of trusting in the divine. Trusting in the divine that it is a true co-creation. Which brings us to our third component, which is willingness. Willingness, in the revealing word, Charles Fillmore says this. He says, willingness is the avenue through which the I am expresses its potentiality. I'm going to say that again. Willingness is the avenue through which the I am expresses potentiality. Willingness is saying yes to God. Yeah. Willingness is taking that first step in faith. Willingness is being open to divine direction that shifts the impossible to the possible. Willingness is knowing that discomfort is an amazing teacher. And it sometimes really helps you get your fresh start and find your true path to change. It makes me think of the Gospels where the story of Jesus walking on the water. It starts out with Peter and the apostles in a boat. This boat was their familiar space. It was their comfort zone. And as they're out on the water, Peter looks out to see Jesus doing the impossible. He is walking on water and coming toward them. He couldn't believe his eyes, but his eyes were on the way shower. So when Jesus comes up and asks Peter to step out onto the water with him, Peter's willingness to say yes to God shows up, and he takes his first step onto the water. And he himself begins to walk on the water because he is present to the way shower and present to his own empowerment with a God within. And he takes a few steps, and then he looks down. He remembers that he thinks this is impossible, and he starts to sink. And Jesus reaches out and catches him. I think this is a great analogy for us. Peter left the comfort of his boat. When Jesus, the way shower, called and invited him to do the impossible, he had a willingness toward God that said yes, and he took the first step. Sometimes that's the most important part of a fresh new start. He also did something really powerful that we do through unity. He kept his eyes on the way shower. He kept that connection. And in his humanness, he looked down and he began to doubt. That happens to all of us. But what Peter knew to do was to look back to the way shower. And the way shower extended a hand to help. That's what a way shower does. They show us the way to put these spiritual practices in action in our own lives. I think that is a powerful expression of willingness. Spiritual will is the power of choice, commitment, and willingness. These are the components. And when I'm talking about where there's a will, this is the will I'm talking about. I'm talking about the power of will. I'm talking about how it's so important to engage that power of will. Let it rise up within you when you have a new beginning or a fresh new start. So now I want to pull on the thread of the last piece. Surrender is the way. To engage the act of surrender is to let go of resistance. Whew, that's a big one. Let me say that again for the folks in the back. Surrender, to engage in the act of surrender, is to let go of resistance. Resistance, that stuff that gets in the way of our fresh new start, that fresh new experience. Resistance is all the places where we've already told God, no, not me, not here, not this way. I really like looking this way. I don't want to see out of my peripheral. Have you ever seen the meme where there's a cat sitting in a cat carrier and she is focused on the door, the metal cage is shut tight, and yet the entire top of the cat carrier is open? But she's in resistance, so all she can see is the metal door, and she wants that door to open so she can be free. All the while, freedom is literally over her. Boy, have I been that cat. And I love the idea of creating surrender as a practice of lovingly letting go one resistance after another, one at a time, as they come to you. I also tend to have this thing of judging myself when I see my resistance. Before I let it go, I have to judge it. What a crazy practice. So it seems so reflexive to me, like it's a reflex. And it's hard to stop a reflex. So I've decided that since I can't stop the reflex just yet, I'm going to employ something I call kind sight. Kind sight. Kind sight is looking back on my resistance and loving that woman. Saying, silly Natalie, it's okay. Look how much you've grown. Look how much you've expanded. Just love this moment. Love yourself. I reword it with kind sight. It's important because what I'm realizing is the more I engage in kind sight, the less quick the reflex is to be critical. I'm starting to shift that practice. Shifting that practice to surrender and lovingly let go. You know, when I was talking about this earlier today, I was thinking about this great song. I'm pretty sure you know it, and I think I'm going to mix the lyrics here a little bit, but this is such a great song for surrender. It's, I release and I let go. I let the Spirit run my life. I am one with the Spirit. Yes, I'm only here for God. Sing it with me. I release and I let go. I let the Spirit run my life. I am one with the Spirit. Yes, I'm only here for God. Yes, yes. It feels good to sing it. In fact, I often will sing this song even when I'm in traffic. Somebody cuts me off and I'm like, I release and I let go. It brings joy and kind of fun to the practice. It really helps me to engage it on a deeper level. Get beyond my critical mind for just a moment and sing this great song and feel into that release. I suggest you do it yourself too. So take a deep breath with me now. Where there is a will, surrender is the way. They support each other. They're a great foundation for a fresh start. It's important to remember the difference between willfulness and the power of will. One is an exercise of the egoic mind. The other is engaged with your higher self. Where there's a will, surrender is the way. I hope you have a great, fresh new start, wherever that is in your life. And I hope you engage this phrase. Where there's a will, surrender is the way. Thanks. I want to pray into the oneness together. Eternal loving presence, divine mind, here in heaven, hallowed be our holy name. Our kingdom has come. Divine will is always being done on earth. May we realize heaven. May we know we are of source, and our every need and desire is already ours. The source is all there is, and we, as source, are abundant givers and receivers. May we live from the oneness and recognize we are always connected to one another. Allow divine thoughts to express through us, as us, and deliver us from any broken thoughts of separation. For ours is the kingdom, the power, and glory, now and forever. Amen. It's been great being with you here today. Have a wonderful Sunday.